Reactionary violence is colonial violence. On July 20, 1983, my son Mark Stephen Lazenby was born to myself and his teenage mother, L. Lazenby. I was 16 years old and in the Lake County Jail for attempted robbery and soon to be sentenced to 30 years in prison. And she was 19 years old, soon to be a single mother. They had just walked across the stage at Westside High School to receive her diploma while pregnant. We would name him Mark Stephen Lazenby, and approximately 6 days later, I would be sentenced to 30 years as a first offender and sent out to the so-called Department of Corrections. I was one of the many young New African/black males that had been harvested out of the ghetto colony by one of Reagan/Bush policies against tough on crime. I was served 15 years of that sentence. During that whole period of captivity, my son and I were extremely close. His mom and I were high school sweethearts, and although she would eventually move on to live her life, we remained close, and she never denied me access to my son. I would eventually give him the name Jela Simba Shakur. Jela and I could pass for twins, and even now people see old teenage pictures of him and immediately think that it is me. He was also a young athlete that could both box and play basketball. When he was in the 8th grade, he was already being scouted by a top 10 Indiana college that invited him on campus and gave him a full recruitment package tour. I can still remember how shocked and excited about all of that, all of the pretty college girls that were shying in with attention. We just couldn't keep him on track or focused. His mom would go on to have 2 more sons and 3 more daughters. While Jelani didn't have a father in the house, he had mentors and an extremely close relationship with his grandfather, who tried to save him from the mean, harsh streets of Gary, Indiana, and East Chicago, Indiana. But he couldn't compete with the housing projects of East Chicago and the local school system that recruited my son at an early age into the Vice Lord Street Organization and family. He was proud of this and loyal and impressed that as a 14, 15-year-old, he was being shown a lot of love and respect by the OGs and leadership. Once he learned that I was the GD, he didn't know how to take it. I used to quiz him about his organization while trying to politicize him. He only knew the basics. As usual, the old heads wasn't raising the youngsters up. They were just having them put in work. But I also think that the organization provided him a family structure as far as being a young black man that he didn't have or felt wasn't enough. I would develop a close relationship with all of his siblings. What I did for one, I did for all. They used to wonder if I was their real dad. When I came home in 2000 after the parole violation, Jayla came to live with my wife, Akili, and I for a while. It was the first time he and I really had a chance to bond on the streets together. It was a new experience, and although my wife had kids whom I grew to love and get close to, except for the baby girl, they were all just about grown. So us getting to know each other and excelling outside of a visiting role was both an exciting experience and a challenge. Jayla was a young black boy transitioning from boyhood into manhood as a 17-year-old man-child trying to find his way. A young warrior who, like so many others, had been dealt a bad or a raw hand, growing into manhood without a father to guide or mentor him and forced into a role with overwhelming responsibilities prematurely. Being raised by a single mom, being forced to assume the role of protector, provider, and man in the house at an early age, while I myself was being forced to become a man and grow up fast while trapped behind enemy lines and fighting for survival. The ghetto and the streets is a rite of passage for many of us, but so is the penitentiary. Young black men coming into or being harvested into the prison industrial complex as teens or 20-somethings, having or going through a form of unnatural arrested development. I was a father, a dad, a pops before I even knew what that entailed as a black man in America. As a young man, I was still trying to discover who I was and what it fully meant to have a young son while beginning a fresh 30-year sentence. What did it mean being in love with a young 19-year-old woman who had just given birth to your child and feeling like you had abandoned both as behind the walls? You battle and bang with racist-ass prison guards that is trying to crush your spirit and rob you of your sense of humanity. Subtitle: Hood violence is a result of colonial violence. Reactionary violence in poor communities, oppressed or neo-colonized communities is a result of our relationship to the state/government. It is a result of the unequal distribution of resources to our communities, the economic deprivation and class exploitation within our communities, where a colonial relationship masquerades as institutionalized racism. When from birth to death you are told or shown in life that your life has no value or self-worth, that you ain't shit. This messaging, this signaling, is often internalized. Internalized to the point where the lack of mentors, the lack of knowledge of self and recognition of self-worth has you full of self-hate and self-destructive tendencies. This view of yourself is also projected onto those that you see in your image. You ain't shit, nigga. Nigga, I will kill you. Black ass nigga, you ain't never gonna be shit. Over and over. American society has always devalued black life, both black manhood and womanhood, as men were physically and emotionally castrated, and as black women had their wombs violated and babies ripped from their bodies or secretly sterilized without their consent or knowledge. As we swung from trees amongst the magnolias or burned alive in fiery pyres. Jela was shot twice in the back with a shotgun as he tried to walk away from a fight with another teenager who he thought was a friend whom he had played basketball and video games with all day. Most young men couldn't beat Jela hands up because he knew how to fight. And this particular kid, he just wanted, he thought was a friend he walked away from or tried to. Another 17-year-old kid who took my son's life and who through that very act killed a significant portion of his own life, and after having been sentenced to 55 years for the crime of murder. Two lives ruined and destroyed as the colonial state continues to dig deeper into our collective soul and spiritual psyche. Subtitle, A Vicious Cycle. L. Lazenby had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, a black Brady bunch without the class and privilege of growing up in a white middle-class suburbia. 5 years after Jela was murdered, his youngest brother, baby brother Joshua, who was only 14 years old, whose girlfriend was also expecting a baby, was shot in the back and killed while trying to squash a street beef between 2 rival groups. Shot in the back while hopping a fence, running away from a grown-ass man that stepped out on the porch with an assault weapon and started shooting at a group of kids. Like Jela, Joshua's girlfriend would go on to give birth to a little girl, a daughter that he never laid eyes on. And like my granddaughter, will grow up never having known her father. Now, fast forward several years, and the last son, James, who left Gary to make a fresh start, only to be driving home from work and be hit by and killed in a head-on collision by a lady Texan driver that had swerved across the yellow line. I cannot make this shit up. Imagine just for a minute the psychological trauma and impact their mother, grandmother, and sisters have had to deal with. Trauma, PTSD, crushed. Imagine being in the shoe/solitary confinement and having to absorb all of this information. There is no Red Cross or Red Crescent for us, no peacekeepers, no ceasefires or reparations for us, which is why those of us who are men and or fathers got to step up to the plate with our women and represent. Remember, while we might have allies, sympathizers, or supporters, we are our own liberators and responsible for our own liberation and freedom. Happy Father's Day to those that have kids or have chosen to embrace all kids in our community as our own. Free the land, Shaka Shakur.